Thank you, Damien, because you thank me all the time. I don't think I thank you enough for being the head of this project and doing everything I don't do. So the state of the front end. 2017 was a pretty big year. These are a lot of, all the features I could find back to the previous conference. We'll be talking about the first three in more detail, but we have a lot of things that are coming up and a lot of things that have been done to make VuFind a lot better going forward with technology, making it easier to customize. And I'm listing all the features out here because what I want to talk about today is more like the philosophy and the reasoning behind why I do everything. Last year's talk and the previous talk were very like in the weeds code, like this is what the new data API looks like and things like that. Whereas this year I kind of wanted to talk about more why things are happening because I think our documentation on GitHub and our code has gotten better. So I wanted to talk about things. This year seemed to be the year of easier customization, which is why I did a lot of the ideas that I did. And that seems to be the number one priority right now for me is making VuFind as easy to customize on the front end as possible. So looking at the biggest features for 4.0, Sandal, the new modern theme, is really great. I wanted to update the fonts. The new web standard right now is 16 pixels. The Bootprint theme was 14 pixels, so bringing everything up to a font size that looks better on mobile, and looks better in the browser, that matches a lot of other sites. Moving up to a native font stack, which is a very small thing where it increases load times slightly, but mostly it gives you the best looking font. So in this case, this is the Windows default font, but I find this really helps on mobile. I'm a big fan of the new San Francisco font on the Apple devices, and that allows us to use this. And using more font weights to bring out more important elements like the title or the author or highlighting fields, things like that. Making sure that smaller things are easier to read, bigger things are easier to read. These were the principles that helped me get just the base of Sandal up and running. I had that slide twice. The other important thing was to demonstrate common advanced features. As we design our own library site here, and we're looking to all different other sites as to what they're doing, there's a bunch of common things, a bunch of common features and design choices that I saw. So I wanted to, with the customization of the style, highlight how some of these things could be accomplished so that they could just be pulled out as an example. One of the things was the full width header, which is something that we've talked about a lot, having the navigation across the top be not constrained to whatever container you have, making it full width. The other thing is the big image search box, where you have a nice, beautiful image with your search on top, bringing it to the forefront. This is something I'm seeing on almost every site we're looking at least here at Villanova. So finding the magic code that breaks it out and makes it look nice was something I wanted to get in there. For sure. We also have the new custom themes, the mix-ins Damien talked about. We have a new code that allows you to make your own theme much quicker, get it off the ground. It does a lot of default things for you. And it also gets you started with a minimally customized theme. And some of the ideas here was to make it really quick and easy to show where those changes are. So there's a very simple customized template for the search home. There's customized lesson CSS in really obvious ways that, like with comments to show where you would style different things and how to navigate all the files. And one of my goals was to make it just ugly enough to inspire change. So I made the font on the homepage really big. It's really obnoxious. Like this tab is ridiculously sized. I made the background a green that doesn't look bad, but doesn't look great. I wanted it to be a good starting point where a few common features are there, but it's not necessarily a theme that you'd want to put up as is the way that Bootstrap or Sandal are designed, that you can use that out of the box and it'll look nice. This looks just a little bit off in ways that'll inspire you to go and make custom changes. At least get your colors in there really fast. So that was part of the design principles for the template theme. And I thought that was really fun to find the right balance of that. The original design had a lot more red in it, and that was just too much even for me. The big work that I've done this year for 4.0 is trimming Bootstrap out of the themes. We're still using Bootstrap, and it's still the main design framework for everything. But I wanted to remove a lot of the hard-coded classes out of Bootstrap, which would make it much easier to customize. So I went in and removed a lot of the Bootstrap classes, and I made sure that everywhere there wasn't a unique name, I added more class names in, or made sure the ID, all the IDs were of a similar format to make it easier to find the right elements and customize them, which I expected to make the templates a lot lighter, a lot easier to understand and organize, and a lot easier to find what you're trying to customize and to do so. Hopefully Sandal and the new Sandal theme and the new Bootstrap version are the easiest to customize. That was really my goal. Some of the changes I made have been slightly, I don't want to say controversial because it's just Damien asking me why I'm doing this. But I redid the way the facets are displayed, like altogether. I removed all the Bootstrap styling and I made my own custom class. And the reason for that is I find that a lot of the Bootstrap 3 classes are very hard to customize because of how specific they are. When you're working with CSS, I know I didn't say I get too into the weeds, but this is the weediest as it gets. The more specific, the more identifiers you have in a class, the more powerful that becomes, because CSS isn't in order from top to bottom, it's by what's most specific. So this is the way it looked with the default Bootstrap styling. So if they had a hover effect in there, it's even more specific. If they had it so if you made changes, it was really hard to track down all the things that Bootstrap is doing to make it look really nice for Bootstrap and to make it look more like your own custom code. I find that if you're doing something with if you want a dark background with white text over it, hover effects tend to make it impossible to read, often getting dark on dark or white on white colors. So I changed it all to just the facet, which should be really easy to override if you just include the class name at all. If it's later in the code, it'll override it. If you add your own class, or if you add any kind of more specificity to this, it just makes it much easier to customize. And it looks very similar, while the underlying stylings are much simpler. So hopefully it's much easier to understand, and more importantly, much easier to override. This is why I took the time to pull out a lot of the Bootstrap things. This is one example that kind of highlights why I was so driven to pull the Bootstrap classes out of the templates. One of the new things I did add was flex columns. As I pulled out the Bootstrap hard-coded classes, the column widths that were hard-coded in have been pulled out. And I used flex columns, which is a newer CSS feature to take over that. There's a lot more responsiveness built right into the flex columns. They wrap. I didn't have to put as much work into finding the right breakpoints. Flex handles, if it's too narrow, it already breaks or rearranges. It can scale different ways. So I use that. You'll see a lot in the code this 0, 1, and then %. That was just one way I found to get it to look really nice and get the exact width you wanted off the bat without ruining all the responsiveness of flex columns. Which brings me to talking about the future, what's coming up next. There was a lot of upcoming features that didn't quite make the 4.1 cut, and there's a lot of new CSS technologies out there that I'm evaluating, and some of them I haven't gone with, and I wanted to kind of explain why. So something coming really soon is the new off-screen sidebar. Right now the sidebar takes up about this much of the screen with a big arrow handle on the side, and that's something that's bothered me for a little while because you already have only this much room on your mobile screen. So inspired by Amazon moving the button to a place that's more responsive, easier to see, and doesn't take up as much room was an important goal. The other thing that's coming, and you almost can't see it behind our online people, is account AJAX reports. Is that it checks your holds, your statuses to see if anything's overdue, or if you owe any fines or fees or anything like that, and gives you a notification up where it says your account when you logged in. And part of that, and you can't really see, is that turning the top little icon, have the option of it being a drop-down menu, so you can see all of your actions and go directly to the right page. Is part of that. This is something that's still being tested and worked on. But you can see here, if they have a hold that's either available or overdue, it gives you a little notification, and if you drop down, you can see exactly what's going on and go directly to that spot and take care of it. So these are open pull requests that should be merged in rather soon. Not sure what release they'll be tagged to. There's no release, new release scheduled yet. Bootstrap 4 is out, as is always the case. Whenever I release a new theme, there's a new Bootstrap version to go along with it. So this has been in alpha for a long time. And we're probably not going to update to it, at least not for a while. Bootstrap 4 is a lot better. The specificity problem I talked about is mostly resolved. The styling's a lot better. It's a lot lighter. But it would require some rewriting some templates like the pagination that I didn't think was a necessary step. But by pulling out all the hard-coded Bootstrap things, I found that if you just switch out the Bootstrap library you're using to version 4, it's not too much more work to get there, which was part of the idea, is that if you wanted to use Bootstrap 4, if that was important to you, you can replace the Bootstrap dependency, or you can use Foundation. We have a Foundation branch. But if you wanted to replace your overall framework with something, it's much easier to change the CSS framework now that I pulled things out. So we're probably not officially updating, at least for a while, unless something really compelling comes out of the alpha. But it should be much easier to upgrade if you want to. One of the new CSS features, oh good, my GIF is working, is CSS Grid. One of the problems that I've been facing with Bootstrap for a while is the idea of making the search box as responsive as possible. Initially I put in 2 search boxes, which caused some issues of theming and like autocomplete problems. There were some duplicate ID problems for a while. Putting it right up there has been an issue because it doesn't quite fit there in a lot of cases if you do any kind of customization. And having it below isn't always the best looking idea. This is the way the current branch looks. It still needs some work, but CSS Grid is really powerful in allowing you to rearrange elements of the page to make things move around and jump around a lot nicer. So this is one search box, all CSS, no JavaScript, where you can have a full width header, and just when it gets too small, it rearranges it. It's much smarter. So this is probably the next step going forward. There's not a lot of support for it yet. That might be on the next slide. No, not yet. But like Internet Explorer hasn't supported this yet, which is one of the big reasons. We don't want to break backwards compatibility too hard. But this is a cool feature that I'm looking to use more. PostCSS, we use less, and we port over to SAS, which is or SCSS. I'm not sure what people prefer to call it. I'm still a less user. But PostCSS is out there, and I'm a big fan of it personally for my own projects. But I think adding a third thing to compile or work in is just a little bit too far. I like PostCSS because it has a lot of libraries that make themselves obsolete. So it uses the upcoming syntax of the upcoming CSS versions. The idea being that if you write the code in the CSS Next style, it'll always be compatible, even as the compiling library itself gets smaller and smaller as it has to do less and less work. And that's really appealing to me. It's much more future-proof, but I think changing what we write in as main or adding another step for compilation is just not on the table right now, but I am not against it. It is, again, my personal language of choice, but we'll keep using less and making sure SAS is fully supported going forward. Damien talked about improving the code quality of JavaScript, and there's a new tool that I've been also using going forward called Prettier, which I highly recommend checking out if you do any kind of JavaScript at all. It completely reformats your code, and instead of like taking what you have and adjusting it, it breaks it apart into all the tokens and rearranges them nicely. It's very opinionated on about the way it works, which is why we haven't switched to it yet. So it's opinionated means that there's very clear rules of what it does and does not do, and it's customizable in certain ways. And it would mean that when you commit, it would automatically reformat the code so it looks the same, and then commits that, so there's not like a failing test that tells you what's wrong. It reformats all the code so that it never fails and it all looks the same according to whatever principles we choose. The only con is it's really opinionated in some places. They like an 80 width column thing, and sometimes in JavaScript that's not quite wide enough. So finding the right balance of configuration is something that I'm looking into. This might be something that we switched to, because I've started using it in other projects to see how it works in the workflow, and I've liked it. So this is something that is possibly on the horizon if people aren't too against it. Another one of the big features that is really popular is mobile first has been the idea for a long time, but now now people are talking about offline first. What happens if a user doesn't have a connection and jumps on? In most websites and in VuFind today, if you're offline and you're trying to do things, you'll either see an endless loading spinner or a 404 page, whereas a lot of sites like Slack now give you something, at least show you the visual framework of everything, and then load in content as it's available, which means that you'll always get something, and you can choose what you store offline in the browser, so that if a user's been to a page, they can at least go and look at like their account options, or they can go and check out, like they can still look at their favorites list without being online, which is really useful. And I'm really excited about, but the big problem here is browser support. Internet Explorer is just starting to support it, but the big deal breaker for me, which is why I haven't gone and done this already, is that service workers, which are required to store things offline and pull them back up, are completely non-supported by iPhones. So the biggest case here would be someone, for me, it would be someone on their phone pulling out and checking to see if like, oh, what was that book I just sent to myself, or let me look at my book list. But most phones don't support it at this point. So unfortunately for me, that's currently a deal breaker, but it's something that I'm definitely keeping an eye on if this is on your horizon. Speaking of that, more progressive web app like features that are coming out with service workers, like notifications. Again, it's just a support thing. Once Apple gets on board, basically, this will become a much more attractive option. It's already very interesting, but even Internet Explorer is on, well, it's not Internet Explorer. Even Microsoft is on board with Edge. But once the mobile catches up, this will be much more attractive. Having notifications, having much lighter mobile interface is interesting. One last small thing is that there's a lot more features with the new version of JavaScript, like classes, but I don't think we're going to go there because our current work case is that we have one object for each thing. The VuFind JavaScript object is one copy of a single object that we expand, whereas this is more for making multiple copies. So unless we decide to make all kinds of pretty like particle effects or like have multiple accounts in at once, which is very unlikely, it seems like a little overkill for a system that's already working really nicely. Going forward, the ways to customize it, we haven't used libraries like React or Svelte, and Web Components is the new one that's like native built into HTML. There's not a lot of support for it, and it would require a complete overhaul of the way that templates work entirely in VuFind. Maybe Zen Framework 3 makes this a more attractive option, but right now, loading a template and then waiting to load all the JavaScript and then waiting for the JavaScript to load the interface seems like too many steps for what we're currently doing with VuFind, which is much more static and not as interactive and crazy. But so probably not, but I am keeping an eye on these technologies as they go forward. I am going to edit this slide really quick to put my contact information on here because Damien's slides made me realize I didn't have mine. There we go. So I'll take some questions. I'm not sure what time it is. I feel like that was a good pace, but
it is 10:13.
Oh, right on the nose.
We have till 11, so we are way ahead of schedule.
We are way ahead of schedule. So I just finished up the last of Damien's slot. But of course, I'll be here for questions, concerns, and font suggestions. I love fonts. My custom font didn't pop up, but if you have any of these, you can also tweet at me if you're not currently in the conversation or in this room or online. So any comments, concerns, questions?
It's me again.
Hello.
Hi. Great hair. What's the only concern I have really is that we have trouble keeping up with all the changes. So you know they all make sense. So to a great extent, but since we have customized our themes quite a lot, it's a great deal of work for trying to update to a new version and making sure that everything works properly, especially with all the JavaScript and template like kind of.
Well, I'm sorry. I do get a little excited. We do try to keep the theme major breaks to the major versions, but maybe this is something we could work on. Maybe looking at all this new technology isn't the way to go. That's okay. So that's something we can definitely talk about in the road mapping session. Or one thing I forgot to mention is I want to get some contributing guides and overall documentation about like the ideas that are driving VuFind up like in a open source format. So maybe that's something we can all agree on, like when these breaking changes happen or if they happen at all. I do understand there's been a lot very quickly, that there was breaks in 4.0, there was breaks in 4.1, and we're trying to be aware of that, but sometimes the new features are really attractive. So I'm sorry that it has changed so much. I am aware of that. And trying to get it to a place where that's not necessary is something I'm working on. So, yeah.
Is there any way to make it so that it's more plug and play for wanting to say do Bootstrap 3, Bootstrap 4, so that you don't have those breaks and templates over time? I don't know if there's a way in refactoring your code or making it more modular that would allow for that, the backward breaks not to happen as much, or being able to customize up to. Because when we
Yeah.
migrated up to 4, I had to redo all of our custom themes just to. I love the new way that the content's done. It's a lot more flexible.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a matter of going in and making those changes. But I don't know if that's something that you should look
Yeah.
at or if it's even possible.
Remote can't really hear the question or the
Sorry,
comment.
The question was talking about, is there a way to change, correct me if I'm wrong, to change it so that it's much more modular, so that these breaking changes don't break an entire theme, that it's much easier to both pick and choose what the new features are, and also keep your changes on top of the changes in VuFind, because as new features roll out, it tends to come with a lot of breaking changes and having to go and change all your
Or if there's a
the
way to like
templates.
notify you and say that these ones broke, so that because
Yeah.
things can be really complex and you can kind of miss it as you're going along until you're like way down in the weeds and you're like, oh, this is broke, and then you have to go hunt down and say, oh, it was because of this. If there's a way to help with that,
Yeah.
this change, and so then you're going to have to change all of these things.
Yeah, and the other part of it was documenting the changes better, so that it's easier to figure out why things are breaking and going forward. And I'll definitely do better about that on my part. I did provide some documentation for 4.0, but I know that it was a lot, and it's hard to be on top of. But I felt like this was the last major break I had to do, because, as you said, it is much easier to change. To me, I always thought that having people update their CSS and their less is easier than finding your custom templates and updating them. I always found that changing the template is a much bigger commitment, especially when you're messing with something like the search box, which is not as modular of a component, or if you're looking at like the search results, like it's a very large, or the layout in particular, it's a very large file, and if you want to just change like a word or two, it's a huge undertaking to keep that file up to date. That is something that we're talking about. We always talk about ways we can break the templates down smaller, and now that most of the styling is done in the less without customizing the HTML, I feel like we're in a place where the breaks will be smaller, easier to detect, and going to one place to make all your changes to keep it up to date is better than bouncing back and forth. So this was part of the effort for that, but of course, when we roadmap, and of course, when you can come and talk to me, I am aware that there are complaints about how often things break. So it
wasn't a big deal for me. I
Okay.
was just thinking kind of along what Ari was saying, that there's a way to help facilitate just the
Yeah.
information flow. But no, I think it's great where it's at. I knew when I upgraded, I was going to have to rewrite the templates up, but I was excited about that.
I'm sorry if I got defensive.
No.
I tend to.
It's okay.
But yeah, no,
It's a good change.
I'm totally open to whatever makes it easier to customize and less terrifying when a new feature comes out. Yeah, Chelsea.
I'm just gonna say, we kind of got our current live version is on 2.4. We're pretty far forward, and so instead of migrating to 3 and the 4, we kind of we're gonna do a fresh install of 4 and try and pare down some of our customizations. And when I did that, I found some of the things that we had done custom at that point had been brought into 4. We had been in our design, we wanted sidebars on the left. We had done a lot of customizations for different placeholder text, just different stuff, a lot of templates, and I noticed that some of that is already configurable. So I noticed that the work is starting to make it more modular, and I was able to pare down this huge CSS file from maybe 2,000 lines using SCSS and less. And I'm setting the Sandal theme, which I love.
Well, thank you for positive.
You want to summarize
Yeah.
that?
In summary, one of our partner libraries here in Philadelphia is talking about updating from 2.4, just skipping right to 4.1, and they're being very excited about their custom features being now part of main VuFind, meaning that it's a lot less customization and more configuration, and the overall customization work is much less. She said that they're able to bring their huge 2,000 line file down to just a few hundred lines. So things are going in the right direction. And just wanted to share that. Thank you for that. Yeah,
Thanks. I also agree with that, and my complaint is not meant to hinder progress or anything. It's not not anything like the change from VuFind 1 to VuFind 2. So we can manage with that. But there's one thing I would like to have maybe is to make it clear that each commit would have a single purpose. It would be it's so much easier to follow the change log when there is a commit that does something clear, rather than have a commit that makes everything better. So if that's possible, please keep in mind that when you try to update your own theme with all the changes required or all the changes that would be good to have, it's always easier if the change set is longer than if there is a few large commits.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. That's something that Damien and I run into a lot, where once we're ready to merge a pull request, it's much too short. It needs to be more descriptive and more modular. And yes, that is something that we are working on. Again, I think I'm another bottleneck for that. I feel like I've been too defensive. Everyone's praising me live, and that's really interesting. I wasn't expecting that, but yeah, that's something we could definitely work on, and that's part of documenting the making a contributors guide, which might be something to do during the road mapping session or during the hack. One of the hackathons is to make sure that everyone's make sure those kinds of things are officially documented, to make it not only mine or Damien's or any of the pull requests, our contributions clearer, making sure all the pull requests are up to the same standard. Yeah. Anything else? I think we're still miles ahead of schedule.
If I may, I might walk up so I can talk.
Sure.
And we can all hear each other. Not to steal Chris's spotlight, but just on the pardon me, on the subject of making the commits clearer, I definitely think that's a big priority for our collaboration, and I nag Chris about it all the time, and so he knows.
Yes.
But certainly I think the challenge that we've had is that we start working on a feature, we open a pull request, it basically forks off into 5 features in one pull request. We go back and forth on a bunch of independent bugs, and then we end up with a commit history with 30 commits that are all cross-cutting, and then it becomes almost as much work to break that apart again and make it into a clear commit history to get it into the main line in a way that makes sense. And I think that's really important to do.
Yeah.
And I think in part we've had a problem of thinking things are almost done, then having the week before the release, and then freaking out and doing it too quickly. So my feeling is that we need to take our time a little more about some of this stuff to improve clarity, and maybe earlier in the process see the signs that a pull request is getting too big and split it apart preemptively rather than waiting till the end and then trying to untangle the knot.
Yeah.
But as Chris says, this is an organic process and we're working on it. But
Yeah, the big 4.0 changes were harrowing because not only were they changing almost every template on the front end, the pull request begat a pull request which needed a modification that we should put in master first, and like it became the workflow became very self-referential and recursive very quickly. So it did take us a full week just to detangle all of that, and that's something we want to avoid
yes,
in the future.
that wasn't a good week. I didn't
No.
like that week at all.
That was no fun.
Well, I'm also guilty of sending pull requests with changes that are not really related, or are related but not necessary to each other. So you're doing a decent job, but I'm just trying to make mine easier.
Yeah, and we can all always do better, so it doesn't hurt to mention that once in a while, even if we're doing okay.